Welcome to Universal God Message of Peace, and I am Lee Weisman, and this is Dr. Zahir, and this is Lale Tunser, and we're in the middle of where we've been having weekly Abrahamic dialogues, and we've been talking about ways of worship. And so, if you checked in last week, you'd see that I talked and talked and talked and talked about Jewish ways of worship, and now this week. I get to relax and I get to lay back and I get to listen to Dr. Zahir. So I'm going to leave it up to you. Talk to us a little bit about ways of worship in Islam.
Thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I begin in the name of the God whose mercy is profound, whose kindness is forever. I think one of the beginning points of discussion of worship may be a good idea to mention the very important verse which is there in the Quran that mentions that the Almighty has created men and jinn for the purpose that they worship Him. They be His servants. The word used for the purpose, ibadat, is translated as worshipping. But it is said that it actually means to acknowledge our Creator and to acknowledge our own status vis-a-vis our Creator. So when an individual, an honest human being, realizes what his status reality is compared to his Creator, the kind of response that ought to be there in him is the basic essence of ibadat. You know, he's struck by awe, the greatness, the bigness, the strength, the knowledge, the wisdom, the mercy of the Creator. And that feeling that he has in him of submission, of humility, of being in touch with and recognizing, understanding somebody who is in control of everything and therefore is the only one who is worthy of being thanked and being worshipped and being relied upon. So that's the beginning point, and that's what the Creator wants from all His servants. To be honest, to be realistic, and to have an idea of who they are compared to the Creator. Now, when it comes to worshipping in the sense that we normally know of, we find that the religion of Islam requires us to express our feelings of submission to the Almighty in various different ways. So probably the most prominent way is to offer what is called salat, formal prayers. But it is also emphasized that alongside salat, we give alms, we give money, wealth in charity, which is called zakat. And then we also fast, which is another aspect of our worship of the Almighty. And those of us who can afford to travel, they would do what is happening right now, Hajj in Mecca and its surroundings. The Quran tells us that the entire, the purpose, the goal of being obedient to the Almighty in various different aspects of our life in general, and worshipping Him in the different forms of worship that have been proposed in particular, they are meant to achieve one important purpose, which is the common purpose of everything that has got to do with religion, whether we believe or whether we practice. And that is what has been described as tazkiyah. Now, tazkiyah has actually two components. One component is the component of cleansing, of purification. And the other component is that of making progress, uh, developing, improving. Now, the idea is that the way we humans have been designed by our Creator, we all humans, have been given a potential of being extremely good humans, both with fellow humans as well as their Creator. Uh, Probably it would not be incorrect to say both spiritually as well as morally. This tremendous potential is checked by, is threatened by the evil that we have within us, the potential of evil, which primarily is comprised of two parts. One is our ego, and the other are our base desires. So when we follow God's message in general and do various different acts of worship in particular, we, on the one hand, are able to cleanse and purify ourselves. In other words, we are able to overcome our evil desires and put check on our ego uh, to keep it within the acceptable limits. And as a consequence, that potential, positive potential is realized, is given the opportunity to grow. Uh, and this tazkiyah is what the Quran mentions is uh, the only qualification, the only prerequisite for an individual to be eligible to enter the all important place called paradise in the next life. So the entire purpose of religion is described as achieving tazkiyah. And no matter what we understand, what we believe, what we practice, that should be the goal. However, these various aspects of ibadat that I mentioned, they all have their own respective goals as well. So what it essentially means is that when I am going through a certain aspect of worship of the Almighty, I have two things in mind, or ought to have two goals in mind. One is the immediate goal, which has been set forth, designed for that particular act of worship, and then not forgetting that that goal in turn is also meant to achieve the ultimate goal of tazkiyah, of purification and spiritual and moral progress enhancement. So, for example, the formal prayer as its goal remembering God, zakat, spending on the poor, has as its goal uh, cleansing within us the obsessive love for worldly possessions, wealth, etc., by helping out the poor with some part of the wealth that we have. Fasting has been mentioned as the exercise which is undertaken for the purpose of God consciousness, taqwa. And Hajj the pilgrimage is meant to uh, show submission to the Almighty by by visiting His house and then assembling there as a group, as an army of soldiers fighting against God's enemy and our enemy, which is Satan. So that's what Hajj is all about. Uh, Let me just mention a few things about the most prominent of the worships that have been mentioned, have been required of the believer, which is salat, which is to say formal prayers. As I mentioned, the idea is that we say our prayers to remember God. Interestingly, this understanding has come from uh, the story that the Quran mentions of the very first revelation that was received by Moses. So the Almighty tells us that when Moses was addressed by the Almighty in the very first meeting that he had with him, uh, the few instructions that he gave him, one of them was, Aqimis salata li zikri. You establish prayer for remembering me. So the idea is that we remember God. And there is a formal way that has been given to us to achieve it. I've mentioned it earlier, I think, when we were talking about marriage, nikah, and divorce, that these teachings have come to us through the process what that we describe as sunnah. It is uh, the prophet who performed salat, and the understanding is that he was not the first one to do it. All earlier prophets did it likewise. There were a few minor changes that were introduced because obviously now it's the Quran which is being read. So he brought the process of formal prayer to its original pristine form, and he said those prayers, and alongside him, all his companions, Muslim believers, they prayed. And when he left this world, the prayer continued. And then when the first generation left this world, the next generation had already started praying. So the formal prayer, like other expectations that we have received through Sunnah, they have undergone this process and have they all satisfy, we think, two conditions. One is of ijma. All the first generation Muslims agreed to the practices, and the other is tawatur. There's this uninterrupted continuity of these practices, the way they have been transmitted to the later generations. So, salat in Islam is expected to be performed 5 times a day. Uh, the timings of salat are such that the first one is done uh, before the sunrise. Uh, After the night disappears and we see the light on the horizon and then taking over the entire surroundings, but before sunrise. The second salat is timed as soon as the sun begins to decline, is on the top, and then as soon as it slightly inclines it towards the horizon, that's the time for the second prayer, Zohar. The first is Fajr. The third prayer is somewhere between the second prayer and the sunset, somewhere in the middle. The fourth prayer, the third is Asr, the fourth prayer is immediately after sunset, and the last prayer, Isha, is when the darkness takes over the entire surroundings. What is the idea of these timings? Well, what we understand is that since the goal set for the reason why we say our formal prayers is to remember God. Obviously, we haven't seen God, but what we do is in order to remember Him, we look at what He has done to us. We look at His kindness, His contribution, the way He manifests Himself in our lives. So, in the 24 hours a day that we experience, there are some very prominent changes that take place in the environment. Each time such a change takes place, it's an occasion for us to glorify our Creator, to thank Him, and to mention Allahu Akbar, God is the greatest. So, not surprisingly, when pitch darkness begins to give way to light of the day, it's the first occasion for us to pray to the Almighty. And obviously, all throughout this exercise, the idea is that the believer acknowledges that it's not happening on its own. It is our God who is doing it, and therefore He deserves to be thanked and to be worshipped. The second prayer, when the sun rises and travels till the midday and then begins to decline, and it's all meant for us so that we have the daylight in which to be able to work and do whatever we want to do. And the believer acknowledges that this is his Creator doing it. So when the sun begins to decline, it's the second occasion to glorify Him and to declare that He is the one who is running the show and to thank Him. The third prayer is when the sun is swiftly moving towards the horizon. Again, by the command of the Almighty, we stop and pray to Him and thank Him. We don't need to guess why the fourth prayer has been required at that time. Well, the sun, that huge ball, bright, source of light and heat disappears after having been visible for hours, just disappears because the one who is running the affairs of this world required it to disappear. And we say, God is the greatest, and we thank Him. And finally, when it's pitch darkness, it's a complete change of the environment. And then again, we pray. The prayer that we say has two components. There's certain postures and there are certain utterances that we mention. In both, there again are two components. One is the binding, and the other is the non-binding, what is allowed to us, the way we choose to do. The binding postures are four. We stand, we incline to do ruku, then we prostrate, and we sit. While what we say is, well, primarily it's essentially some part of the Quran. The first chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Fatiha, is what is to be said in every rakat unit of the prayer. So each prayer has certain rakats, certain units that we have to go through. And we keep saying Allahu Akbar, God is the greatest. So these are some of the binding parts of the prayer. And there are many others which are optional. Now, the final thing that I want to say, I've said already quite a lot. What we suggest to those who say their prayers, and the good number of Muslims who say their prayers regularly, but not very often we find that what they're doing is with the right spirit. They're doing it because they think that it's a religious requirement, which is not a bad idea. Obviously, it's great to show your obedience to the Creator. But then, it's not the ideal. Uh, we need to achieve the purpose for which we are doing this exercise. So what I normally suggest to people is that in order to make our prayers effective, there are at least 4 things that we can do to make them more effective and purposeful. One of which is what the prophet himself mentioned in one of the tradition statements attributed to him, that you worship God as if you are looking at him, because even if you don't look at him, he does look at you, he sees you.
Yeah.
So when you in your prayers, you imagine that your God is looking at you, you at some stage do feel in your prayers that you are also looking at him, even though not physically, not in the literal sense, but spiritually. So, that state of mind, state of your spirit, if you are able to achieve, I mean, there's nothing better than.
Oh,
Oh, the sound is gone.
we lost your
The
sound.
second,
Oh,
is it okay now?
It's okay
yeah,
now.
I got it. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a telephone call which comes and it
Got
mars.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The second thing that I suggest is that, again, mentioned in a prophetic statement, that when you stand for your prayer, uh, pray the prayer of someone who is departing. In other words, imagine that this might turn out to be your last prayer. Quite often, we are not inclined to be focused in our prayers because we have those worldly, you know, uh, activities that are there in our minds, obligations, interests that we are to engaged in after the prayers, or engaged in before the prayers. But if one was to think that, what, it is a realistic assumption, possibility, that this may turn out to be my very last prayer. So that would help. It helps you in focusing on the real purpose of your prayer. The third thing that we suggest is that when we pray, we should understand what we are praying. If the part of the Quran that we are praying, well, we should know the meanings of it and should recite as the Quran itself suggests, slowly, so that each part, each verse that we mention, we understand what we are saying. The last thing that I suggest to people is that, which is not everybody accepts, but some people say that, as and when they started following this particular piece of guidance, their prayer, was revolutionized. I mean, they found a lot of meaning, interest in their prayers. And the idea that I suggest is that since there are 2 parts of the prayer, one obligatory and the other non-obligatory, in the obligatory part, we have no choice but to recite what we have been asked to recite. And therefore, they all have got to be in Arabic. And as I said, we need to know what we are reciting through the translations. But the other part is the one where it has been left to the discretion of the one praying to choose to express himself, herself, the way she likes to. So, in other words, when you're standing, you are inclining, you are prostrating, you are sitting, use your own language. Talk to your creator. Say whatever you want to say. I mean, it's a shame. I keep saying to people that you get so close to your Creator as you do when you are prostrating. Your forehead is on the ground, and you have a feeling that you are the closest to Him. And yet, what you are saying is what you yourself don't know. So tell Him that you're thankful. Tell Him that He's great. Tell Him that you feel embarrassed for what you have done, and so on. And you'll find that your prayer is going to improve in quality. So these were the few things that I wanted to say about worship. Over.
Wow, you preempted
Yes.
all of my questions. Virtually every question I had, you preempted everything, which was pretty amazing, I have to say.
That was
Uh,
amazing.
You,
and
you
I
might
want
you might you might be forgiven for assuming that I have a jinn who does this work for me.
right, listen to my ear. Um, I really, first of all, the advice. Thank you for the advice, because all of those pieces of advice are things that I can use also.
What?
And I just want to especially endorse the last piece. One of the things that occurred to me many years ago is that these set prayers are not really prayer, right? They're reminders to prayer, right? They're an opportunity to pray, right? But the actual praying is something that you have to do, right? It's
That's
putting you in the right position. As I loved how you described it. There you are, you're in the right position. You're in the right place at the right time. But the opportunity of whether you actually open your heart and you actually speak and when you actually are expressing yourself, that's really up to you. I thought that was a very beautiful point, and I really appreciate that a lot. Um, so I want to go back to the beginning to ask a question. Um, and and this is I'm actually sharing my own struggle. Um, One of the questions I've always had about worship, and our word for worship, avodah, is obviously related to ibadat, same word, is I sometimes wonder whether it's automatic. Like the idea is, one idea is that, okay, I have this checklist of things to do. I mean, then that's how a lot of people think about it, right? Checklist thing to do. Okay, so I'm going to pray, 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 pray. I'm going to do this, do this, do this, do this. And if I'm especially spiritual, I add 3 or 4 things to that, right? And I go through my checklist every day. And if I go through my checklist every day, I'm okay, right? And a lot of people I think of religion like that. And as you said, that's not bad. I mean, that's not bad. But does that bring you to the tazkiyah that you talked about? Does that bring you to the purification? If you're kind of, okay, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, is it automatic that it transforms you? Or is there something else that has to happen in order for that to achieve that purification?
that's a very important point. I'm sure, and it really should be the concern of everyone who is devoting time regularly for the purpose of praying. Um, and honestly, there is I would say, a great danger that if you're not conscious of what you're doing, you might end up making your formal prayer your habit, which just happens, and you're not even aware of uh, what you're doing. And there is a verse in the Quran which says that prayer prevents you from doing what is obscene and what is evil. And quite often we ask ourselves this question, um, but this is not happening. I mean, people who say their prayers regularly are telling lies quite as regularly, cheating others quite as regularly. Not all of them, but at least some of them. So, how do you reconcile? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, the verse is pretty much clear and emphatic that this is what the prayer does. And yet we find that the reality seems to be, in some cases at least, quite the otherwise.
Mhm.
So the way we understand it is that the verse is actually referring to the real prayer, the prayer how it should be. And therefore this struggle must go on. And that is why, the kind of suggestions I mentioned, they're so very important. Honestly, if you are conscious of what you're doing while you're praying, and let's face it, it doesn't normally happen in every prayer. I keep telling myself and I keep telling others to just motivate that, even if one of the five prayers that you say every day has the real spirit in it, it's a very good percentage, a very good average. Uh, the idea is that, and it happens if you are even a little conscious of what you are doing in your prayers. If you have done or said something wrong, you are reminded. After all, I mean, you're standing before your creator. That's what you are imagining. And your creator knows that, the kind of strong, harsh words that you spoke to somebody else and insulted him or her. Well, what the hell did you do? So I think, this is what the prayer does. You do things wrong and you're reminded, and then you get the opportunity of correcting yourself. And that's why this reminder enables you to do your tazkiyah over and over again. It's an ongoing process. But you're right. I mean, there is a danger that some people might say their prayers as a part of their daily routine. It's an exercise which is mechanical, uh, completely, uh, without any spirit. That's what the challenge is.
Yeah, I often wonder, people ask me this a lot. I think it's kind of a common question. People say, listen, religion is supposed to make you a better person. But when I look at religious people, I'm seeing people who are more or less like everybody else. Okay. I'm seeing a few saints. Okay. There are a few of them, right? There's some good people, and the rest are normal and sometimes way worse than normal. And I think the way worse than normal sometimes comes from the feeling that, okay, I've paid my debt. Okay, I said my prayers, I ate my halal. I'm not, and I'm more concerned about, whether my chicken is halal than when my money is halal, right? I'm more concerned if my chicken is kosher or my money is kosher, because money being kosher, I'm not so worried about that. But the chicken is very important. It's a question of priorities. And if I've covered my ritual bases, then I'm okay with God. God and I we're fine, right? And now I can go and now I can go and I can do what I want, because you're not necessarily having that encounter with God. If you're really standing in front of God, if you really think you're standing in front of God, then you're gonna have a shame, and you're gonna say, "What did I do?" Like, I'm standing here, you know me, you know what I did. But if you're not having that experience, then you might feel like, okay, I've covered the bases. I think that it's a very big. I think there's always this danger of relating only to the exterior of the faith, and allowing that interior, you know, not to be developed. And I loved hearing what you had to say, because it's so nice to hear, like, the concern for, developing the inside, and like understanding what you say is basic, right? I mean, the idea that somehow or another,
Mm.
in our communication with everybody else, we have to understand what we're saying, but in our communication with the creator of the world, we don't have to understand what we're saying. Makes
Yes,
no sense at all. I mean,
absolutely.
that
Yeah,
makes no sense.
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, let me say just briefly that, what you're saying is absolutely right, and it's a big concern. Uh, my understanding is that, I keep thinking about the reasons why it so happens. that a religious person going through all the religious formalities which are meant to make him, as you rightly said, a better human being, and yet it's not happening. And you are spot on. Unfortunately, in some cases, they're even worse. Uh, one of the things that I would say, I hope you agree with me, each person is being tested, and we all have our
Mm.
respective Satans, doing their jobs. And probably a person who is a religious person and a person who is prominent in his religious status is being tested more
Mm.
because, I mean, he has the kind of weapons, the kind of, resources that should make him better, and therefore his challenge is bigger. But I think aside from this, I'm always worried and concerned. Let's face it, it's probably more in the case of Muslims and Jews, then probably maybe other traditions as well. And in most of the cases, we are what we are because we were born to this faith.
Mhm.
So, I mean, what did we do for it? Nothing. We did not go through the kind of reasoning, the kind of contemplation, inner struggle, search for the truth that would have made us genuinely uh, valuing what we have in the form of religion. It was a part of our tradition. We saw our elders doing it. We saw that the environment was conforming to certain ways, and we also started doing it. So that is what really causes many of the religious people to do things mechanically. And honestly, in many cases, what they're doing is they had no choice. I mean, what else could they have done? So that's one problem that they have to overcome. So what I say is that you have gotten your religion, your faith by birth. Now you get it genuinely. You earn it by understanding it. And Dr. Wiseman, I see a problem in my faith. I mean, people belonging to my faith. I'm not too sure whether it's true in your case as well. People are so wary of doubting. They don't want to doubt. No, 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 no.
Oh, yeah.
And the end result is that they don't think, they don't question, they
Right.
don't critically examine what they're believing in and what they're doing. And as a result, they are deprived of the real, genuine understanding, which I feel you get only after you doubt. Because you have to understand. The second thing that I would say is, creating this problem is, I'm not too sure whether it's true in your case or not, that many Muslims have been able to come up with certain arguments from within the Quran and Hadith to convince them that on the day of judgment, it's going to be a balance, it's going to be good deeds and the bad deeds that are going to be weighed against each other.
Mhm.
And when you say your prayers or do other things of piety and in the domain of worship, the merits, the rewards, what we call thawab, is mentioned in such an exaggerating way that the individual is going through it, gets a feeling that, oh man, I've done so much. What is my cheating and lying is going to do to undermine the good deeds that I've done? That is a big problem, I'm telling you. And I keep telling people that, the Quran tells us that there are some bad deeds which completely destroy and nullify good deeds. So be careful. While you are doing your good deeds,
Mm.
please preserve them and take care of them.
That is also an amazing point. I think I call that the board game approach. the religion, kind of like it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, okay, I look at my points. I have a lot of points, right? And these are like double points. It's double points here, and these are single points here. And it's like playing, it's like playing a game.
Yeah.
But again, you don't understand, we don't understand God's justice, right? So really you have to do the best you can. You have no idea, yes, it's true that one act of kindness may outweigh a lot of things. It's possible, but you have no idea. You have
Absolutely.
no idea. And so you have to do the best you can. And really, that point about owning it, it's funny, I was not born into a religious family, and I'm extraordinarily grateful for that. In the sense that it forced me to actually have to discover things for myself. And when I was raising my child, it was a big problem because my child was born into it. And it was very difficult to try to um, convey to her my experience and to help her to have my experience because she was just born into it. I mean, it's she can't imagine not doing these things. She can't imagine it's not, it and thank God, I think we managed to do a good job with her and she's found her own way. But the doubt, as a teacher, I used to face this all the time because students would get shut down all the time. If they had a doubt, basically two things would happen. The teacher would shut them up, and they had two choices. They would either they would either just abandon the religion altogether because they just said, okay, you're not going to answer any of my questions, right? Not going to answer any of my questions. So obviously you don't have any answers. So why should I be here? Or alternatively, they drank the Kool-Aid, so to speak, and they said, okay, that's it. I'm not going to have any doubts. Okay, I now join the no doubt club, right? And just continue to do things, robotically, just like their parents did. And it's amazing what people will do. At a big, we had a Jewish holiday, and there's a text that we read for this Jewish holiday. And it's very important that we read this thing, and it's a very big deal, and it has to be read at a certain time. And I read I read a translation of it. And these people have been reading this thing for 50 years, and they had absolutely no idea what it was. They had no idea. And it was so important and so compelling. And it was the most important, I had to read this thing. It's so important. And they literally had no idea what it was. But it was that my father read it and my grandfather read it and my great grandfather read it. And somebody must have known what it said at some point in time. But,
Exactly. I think that happens in the Muslim community as well. And many people are advised to learn Arabic in order to read the Quran in Arabic, even if they don't understand it, because they get more reward for it than reading it in their own language, which they do understand. So many people might have even memorized the whole of the Quran, but they don't know any meaning of any of the verses. So it's like,
yeah.
and in the Quran it says, there's do not approach your prayers under the state of, intoxication until you know the meaning of them. So here we know Allah wants us to know the meaning of our words during our prayers. And you've both, made some really good points. I'm in awe about with this conversation, and I'm so grateful to our Creator. So all praise, glory, thanks be to our Creator, and God bless you both. You've both made some amazing points. I think it is difficult. Sometimes we get stuck in the formalities of the doing of the prayer, and then obviously the aim is to remember our Creator, and that is the ultimate aim of the prayers. And to even remember our Creator between the prayers is, more important than the actual contact prayers themselves, it says in the Quran. But So obviously our Creator wants to bring us to a place where we are constantly praying in everything we do. We're remembering him and choosing to worship him to the best of our abilities. The more we remember him, the more likely we will. And also it says in the Quran, doesn't it, that, you know, the charity lifts up the prayers, like they lift up the word. So if we want to lift up our prayers, we should give more to charity and the small kindnesses. You know, I agree with your point, Dr. Zahir, is that shaitan, the bigger responsibility we have, the more we get tested. And I think that is a huge challenge. And it's not easy to be in that situation where you've got this big responsibility. And so I think, you know, let's have compassion on all the people who have this big responsibility, because they are fighting a bigger, you know, they have a bigger challenge, and may Allah make it easy for them. And let's always seek refuge in God from shaitan. And it is important, though, that the leaders in the world, I think the religious leaders, they realize how much of a responsibility it is, because a lot of people, they don't want to pray because they see, you know, people who have this responsibility not practicing what they preach, or you know, cheating people and praying and then doing these things. So it defiles the name of our Creator. I think, you know, all religious leaders have this responsibility, and we should always try to practice what we preach. It's so important, because that's the real message. It just loses the power. The message loses its power unless we actually do what we say as well, as much as we can. And we make errors and we make mistakes, but let's put our hands up and say, we are not perfect. You know, we made a mistake and we repent and we will try harder. And God willing, yes, so that's all I say. But God bless you both. I think we've got 5 minutes. Do you have any more questions, Dr.
Before I go, I have to say this. We have a teaching that any person who teaches you anything gets the title rabbi. So I have to say, Dr. Zahir, congratulations. I want you to put on your CV now, rabbi, because you gave beautiful advice on prayer. For
So
my Jewish friends who are watching this, I want you to notice something. Okay, I want you to pay attention to something. Everything that we talked about today, everything applies to us also. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. The kinds of issues, the kinds of things, the issues with prayer and all that, all this stuff is practical advice for all of us. And it's remarkable. So you're not just a rabbi for me. Now, who knows who you're a rabbi for? Okay, so on the CV. Okay, so now on your Dr. Rabbis are here.
Okay, Dr. Wiseman, please, before we end, listen to this brief presentation from Rabbi Khalid Zahir. You know, the important points that we have discussed, the kind of virtues that a good believer ought to have. Honestly, I very strongly believe they're not luxuries, they're absolutely essential.
Yes, they are.
And you know, we belong to the traditions, let's face it, who keep having troubles with each other. And it is people who understand their faith, they will never be extremists. That's my firm belief.
I agree with you.
I agree.
They will always be eager to talk to each other. Honestly, I have, right from the time I started understanding the Quran, I had been strongly yearning to looking forward to talking to a Jew who understood his tradition. And thanks to Dr. Lale, I've got this opportunity. But I want to tell you that if we understand our respective faiths properly, intellectually, I think we can bridge the gaps and come much closer to each other than what we are right now.
God willing.
Beautiful,
Lovely.
beautifully said.
Yes, that's so beautiful. And I would just like to just finish by saying as well, please, let's not give up our prayer just because we feel like we're not worthy to pray. So sometimes, you know, we have doubt about ourselves and we think, I'm not good enough to pray because I'm not concentrating enough, or I'm not being mindful enough. I'm just doing it as a habit. But even the habit of it, God willing, small steps will save us, because you know, and I say this from my experience as well. From a young age, I've been, you know, surrounded by, you know, the distractions of this world. I was not, you know, my family is not particularly religious. My father is quite religious, but you know, going to a school that I was the only Muslim, and fasting and all of this stuff, it was a big challenge. And I was surrounded by temptations and things. I can say that prayer is what saved me, is the prayer. And seeking truth, obviously that has to be the main thing, really, because let's all seek truth, and God reveals his truth in many different ways to different people, all on their own unique path. So once that truth is being revealed, let's heed to the truth, let's take it on board, and incline towards it, bow and prostrate, and bring that truth into our lives as much as we can. Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
God bless you. Thank you so much.
Okay.
So nice to see you.
Salam alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Shalom.